Hey. Hello, God bless you, I'm Cal McCritchie, and I thought I'd break the flow of my channel a wee bit just to present to you my top 21 favourite all-time movies. Why 21? Because it's my 21st birthday! I am so excited, so hyped, and I've been preparing this movie list for quite some time. When you go through a lifetime of so many brilliant and geniusly creative movies, it's hard to pick a definitive favourite. But after some really hard thinking and consideration, I've thought, yeah, these are the films that really stand out for me, that really speak to me, that really mean something to me, that I never get tired of. I could watch over and over again, and I could still call them classics in my eyes. Now, keep in mind, this is just my opinion. This is not the best films of all time, this is just my opinion. I also have several other rules. If certain films are fairly similar in tones and themes, or the same director or something like that, I can put them both as a tire on the same part of the list. So, with that out of the way, here we go. Number 21 is The Prestige by Christopher Nolan. This is one of those movies that once you watch it, you have to watch it twice. Not once, twice. This is a particularly structured film that once you see the plot twist of this film, you have to just watch it again just to see how all the characters managed to do what they were able to do. This is basically Bruce Wayne versus the Greatest Showman in the contest of who could be the better stage magician, featuring Gollum and the Goblin King from The Labyrinth, not from The Hobbit. The story is that Bruce Wayne and the Greatest Showman used to be best friends in the stage act, but after a serious accident, they then keep at each other's throats to see who can be the better stage magician. From then on, it's a battle of wits as to who can outsmart each other and who can put on the better show for the public. This is one of those shows where you have to watch twice in order to get the full picture. Not once, twice. Because the plot twist is really clever, that you just have to watch it all over again just to see how the characters do it, because throughout the film, they're constantly telling you, are you paying attention? And I really like how it's structured in a non-linear fashion, and yet it still makes sense. And it's a very clever way of storytelling. And Christopher Nolan is a genius director at making these sort of, these film noir-ish thriller sort of films that you have to watch again, because he has a certain structure to each of his films, and The Prestige definitely has a certain structure similar to an act in a magician's act on the stage. They keep telling you, are you watching closely? Even though they clearly are pulling all the strings, they're just taking you in. They clearly tell you, they drag you in at the beginning with Michael Caine telling you how it's all done, with the three parts of it, how it's all done, including, well, The Prestige. So it's a very genius film, and I probably won't say anything more other than go watch it and just see what I'm talking about. Number 20, Dead Poets Society. There was bound to be at least one drama in there, and I decided to pick Dead Poets Society in there because it's really sincere, and it really says a lot about finding your own individuality in a society where people don't really accept that sort of thing. Not to mention the heartwarming performance by Robin Williams, may he rest in the heavens, by the way. It's really a sincere film. It's brilliant for teaching young people about my age just how to be your own person. I mean, you can be the best mathematician, you can be a great philosopher, but if you're not your own person, if you don't have your own personal space and freedom, then that's not really living life. It's just as Robin Williams says, "Carpum lads, seize the day, make your lives extraordinary." And the lessons he teaches are really thought-provoking and really memorable. And it really is a great drama, and you get to know and like these characters a lot. And yeah, it's just got really great acting, and nothing more I can say about it, but nope! Number 19, Back to the Future. Now this is what I call a fun adventure film. The other two parts are great, but the first part is clearly the best part. Don't get me wrong, I'd happily watch the trilogy, just have the first one, the last one, just in this film, Michael J. Fox plays as Marty McFly, a teenager who's good friends with a scientist called Dr. Emmett Brown, played by Christopher Lloyd. Dr. Brown has recently invented a time machine made from a DeLorean race car. And this is a really fun film, and I really like it from a filmmaking standpoint because they're really good at showing you particular details as well as building up to certain moments later on. Not to mention, Back to the Future also has some of the most intense moments in non-horror based films. The whole finale was just so brilliant. You're on the edge of your seat just when you think one thing's going right, another thing goes wrong. No, come on, keep going, go, fix that, go. It's just so intense, and it's just so much fun. Not to mention, it's got really quirky sense of humor about this irony and different historical time periods. And it really is a fascinating setting of going back in time to see your own parents when they first fell in love. That must be so surreal. I certainly have that surreal experience looking back at the photos from my family members. Something else I really like about Back to the Future, it has a really a really brilliantly light-hearted tone. Not that it gets sappy, but it's just enough to make it feel fun. And that's ultimately why I like Back to the Future and the Back to the Future trilogy, is that it's just plain fun. Number 18, Blade Runner, aka sci-fi film noir. This is one of my dad's personal favorite films. And he introduced me to some of the various cuts of the film. Hold on a second. Number 18, Blade Runner. This is one of my dad's personal favorite movies that he showed me, and it really is quite a visually memorizing and thought-provoking film on humanity and mortality and how we live our lives around these things. So in Blade Runner, this is set in the futuristic world of 2019. In a time where people have managed to make these robot human people referred to as replicants. Now, due to the replicants being dangerous, they've restricted their lifespan in a certain way in which they will automatically shut down after a shorter period of time. And because of this, some of the replicants have gone rogue. So they send the Blade Runner, played by Harrison Ford, to go hunt them down and get them. The film set of this film is amazing. It feels alive. It's got so much busy crowds passing by, and it feels real. It feels like you're in a really busy, crowded city. It's constantly raining, and there's all this brilliant lighting. It's also so visually memorizing. You really do feel the sort of city blues as the Blade Runner is going on this mission. And not to mention, the villains are also really sympathetic. I mean, they're doing horrible things, but you understand why. They're arguably just as human as they are, and it leads to one of the most beautifully tragic speeches in film history. And there's certain other details you could go back to, such as, is Deckard a replicant? And some other particular quotes and some other thought-provoking philosophy, such as, I'm sorry she didn't live, but then again, who does? It's just a really thought-provoking film, and I can see why it's definitely a great favorite worthy of a sequel. Number 17, Braveheart. Now, I know what most of you are going to say, "Oh, you blasphemous, stupid person! Braveheart is historically inaccurate! How could you possibly like a piece of trash?" Yes, as a Scotsman, I can definitely confirm that Braveheart is completely historically inaccurate. But that doesn't stop it from being an excellent film, because I prefer seeing this film as an adaptation of the legend of William Wallace, rather than the true story of William Wallace himself. Because there is a scene where people are talking about the legend of William Wallace and how great he was, and judging by the very cinematic way that Mel Gibson has presented to us in his film, it makes sense just to make it seem big and grand, and I just love this film. It's just such great acting, there's great intensity, and it's brilliantly cinematic with some great filmmaking and some equally amazing moments. Some of the speeches, as a Scotsman, it really gets to me right here. I remember my mum and dad saying when William Wallace finished his first speech, everyone in the cinema was, at least in Scotland, was going, "John!" All the English people were going, This is brilliant. And even still, even watching it at home or anything, when William Wallace does those speeches, it really springs around here, which is like, yeah, proud to be Scottish! And the music is so beautiful. James Horner, may he rest in heaven, also provided us with a gorgeous soundtrack with a Celtic feel, and it really knows how to get the mood established. And you can always trust Mel Gibson on not holding back on some bloody battle scenes. So all in all, as historically inaccurate as it may seem, I prefer looking at this as a depiction of the legend of William Wallace. And if you look at it from that aspect, then the film becomes much better because of that. It's in a similar fashion to Amadeus, if you ask me. Number 16, Indiana Jones and Tintin. Steven Spielberg, I love your fun sense of adventure. Indiana Jones and Tintin are both very similar films in the fact that Tintin was mainly inspired by Indiana Jones in terms of its structure. Number 16, Indiana Jones and Tintin. Steven Spielberg, I love your great sense of adventure. These two films are the very definitions of fun adventures, and I love seeing fun adventures in filmmaking, in films. And you can always trust Steven Spielberg to do just that. Or even better, Steven Spielberg and Percy Jackson. So both of these films have provided us with such brilliantly memorable characters and some brilliantly dangerous, captivating, and fun and mysterious adventures. where they find out the treasure and stop some villains from trying to get there first. Relatively simple, but equally great, especially when the stakes are raised higher. In terms of the Indiana Jones series, the best ones, obviously, are numbers 1, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and number 3, The Last Crusade. Raiders of the Lost Ark provides a very classic Indiana Jones adventure with all the classic characters, as basically as classic as you can get. And the third one, the stakes are raised a little bit higher, I think. And we get to see the origins of Indiana Jones in his youth before he goes off on his adventures, as well as getting to know his father, played excellently by Sean Connery. Henry Jones is such a brilliantly fun character in this film and is a brilliant partner to go along with his son Indiana Jones. Not to mention that the practical effects are extremely outstanding, and there's some brilliantly excellent, memorable action sequences. As for Tintin, this is a brilliant adaptation of the comic books. Me and my dad are huge Tintin fans. We have the whole collection, we've read every book, and we even watched the television series. And this film is a brilliant adaptation because it's also visually amazing. It's got some geniusly creative transitions, as well as some great performances. And the motion capture is actually really good. Robert Zemeckis is probably looking at this and going, how do they do that? Because it never ventures into the uncanny valley. It looks realistic. It's still got that cartoonish aesthetic to it. They really have successfully captured a photorealistic interpretation of what the Tintin characters would look like if they were ripped from the comics into the film screenplay. This adaptation of Tintin actually combines 3 adventures, and somehow it doesn't end up as a mess like something like Avatar: The Last Airbender's adaptation. This adaptation actually works. It combines meeting Captain Haddock and his ship and crew and the desert segment in Crab with the Golden Claws, combined with the story and the treasure hunting from The Secret of the Unicorn and Red Rackham's Treasure saga. And it's brilliantly immersive that way, and they know how to keep the pacing going in immersive way. And the transitions are amazingly creative. I don't think they had to do that, but the film is amazingly brilliant with how quirky and how immersive these transitions are. There's one bit where Tintin and Captain Haddock shake hands, going, "Tibaga!" They shake hands, and then you zoom into their hands, and their hands become the hills and desert as you see them riding on camels, walking along. It's just so genius, and I love that kind of imagery put into film. So yes, 2 classic adventures done by Steven Spielberg, the master himself. What could possibly go wrong with that, especially with Percy Jackson? Also, I am still waiting on that stupid Tintin sequel! Number 15, Mrs. Doubtfire and Liar Liar. These 2 films are very similar in tone in that they are both light-hearted comedy films. And both of them featuring 2 of my personal favourite actors, Robin Williams and Jim Carrey. So in Mrs. Doubtfire, it's a story about a man who's recently gone through a divorce with his wife. And due to certain circumstances, it's the wife that has to... his wife, played by Sally Field, has a job since... Sorry, let me start again. So in Mrs. Doubtfire, a voice actor, played by Robin Williams, has a divorce with his wife, but since Robin Williams quit his job, and the wife is the only person with the job, she gets to stay with the children. And Robin Williams really sincerely misses his children, and he will do anything just to see his children again. So he has a clever idea of disguising himself as... do you call them again? Of disguising himself as a babysitter. Yeah, as a babysitter. So Robin Williams cleverly disguises himself as... and Robin Williams cleverly disguises himself as a babysitter named Mrs. Doubtfire. And cleverly disguises himself, dear, in this Scottish lady. And hilarity ensues since then. And it's a hilarious film, and it really is heartfelt as well. Again, mainly due to Robin Williams' performance. He really had such a huge heart. And it really shows in some of the scenes when he's talking about how much he misses being with his children and how much they mean the world to him. And it's for that reason the film has its good light-hearted tone. I really do love these feel-good movies. And what's also similar to that film is Liar Liar. In this film, Jim Carrey is a lawyer who often cheats and lies his way through many court cases and through work just to make himself look better. But unfortunately, this is also unintentionally upsetting his son, who he really, really loves. So, one night when he couldn't attend to his birthday party, his son wishes that just for one day his dad could not tell a single lie. And the hilarity ensues from there, especially combined with Jim Carrey's physical slapstick comedy, and his reactions are absolutely hysterical. It really is brilliant. There's just some classic scenes when he's obviously knowing that something's not right, and his reactions are just brilliant, such as when he's approaching the same hobo approaches every day, such as, could you spare some change? Absolutely! Do you think you're going to help me out? Yes, I could! Then why did you help me out? Because I believed in my both with it! He keeps ranting on like that, and of course there's the classic red. Red, okay, here goes. The color of this pen is black. And again, it's heartfelt for the same reason as it is with Mrs. Doubtfire. He sincerely loves his son, and he wants nothing more than to be with him, except that his own ego, as it were, had gotten him in the way, and now he has to pay the punishment for one whole day. It's hilarious and heartfelt at the same time, and he does eventually get back to his son. So that's why I love these two films equally together. Same sort of tone, and remember, care for your children. They are our future generation and our heart's fuel. Number 14, A Monster Calls. This is a very interestingly creative film, which I would highly recommend for anyone aged 13 and upwards, or anyone who's going through a very troubling time, especially if a close relative is going through a serious illness. This film is actually based on the book by Patrick Ness, and this adaptation is equally as good as the book. It tells it word for word, visual by visual, and it takes advantage of the fact that it's a visual spectacle. However, they do leave one character out, but they do make up for that with some other visual little hints and details with it being a film. But I'll get to that later. This is a story about a 13-year-old young boy named Connor, who's going through several struggles in life that mainly center around the fact that his mother is suffering from a terminal illness. But then one night, he notices at 5 past midnight that a huge elm tree monster has approached his house and says to him that he's going to tell him 3 stories. And after he's told his stories, Connor will tell him a 4th, and it will be the truth. The stories themselves are visual spectacles. It's like someone brought a watercolor painting to life, and it's very similar to that story segment from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. It's got a similar tone, in fact. The whole film has this sort of similar tone. It's a sort of a dark fantasy film. I'd highly recommend it for 13-year-olds and upwards, older children, because it crosses the line between the light-hearted children's fantasies and the harsh realities of the adult world. So it's great for the older children demographic. And you might want to borrow some hankies and tissues for this one, because it gets really sad and depressing. But it's still a really great film for learning how to mature and how to grow from such a crisis. And I really do like the visual hints that it gives out throughout the film. Throughout the film, there's these photographs of Liam Neeson, who plays the monster. And he's apparently this grandfather. It's sort of a blink and you'll miss them details, but it just enough focus just to make you, hang on, wait, was that him? And no one says anything specifically about these sort of things, but it's the little details that I love about films like these, especially when it comes to the ending. The ending actually has an extended scene which really ties everything together, which I also really like about this film adaptation. So overall, this is a great film that I highly recommend for you. Just be warned, it's not an easy film to get through. Number 13, Fantasia 2000. Yes, I prefer the sequel rather than the first one. Please don't crucify me, I have a rope pillow. But seriously, the reason I like the sequel rather than the first one is probably the same reason that most kids prefer the sequel. It's due to the fact that the first, as great as the first one is, I felt that some segments just tended to drag a bit too long. And whereas Fantasia 2000, their segments went on for what felt like the right amount of time. Not too quick and not too long either. And I know what you're going to say, oh, the celebrity hosts get distracting with their stupid jokes. And oh, some of the shorts themselves are a bit too cartoonish to be on Fantasia. How could you do this? Yes, I do agree that that can be a bit distracting. But here's the thing, the celebrity hosts aren't in it for that long, as distracting as they may seem. But The things that I like about Fantasia 2000 that make it stand out from its predecessor, I really admire, especially as an artist, because not only do they present us with a whole series of music going to beautiful animation, but they also give us different styles of music, complemented by different styles of animation that dance and jump and leap around to fit with this music, to make visual poetry. My personal favorite segment in this film is the Firebird Suite. In case you didn't know, I'm a huge fan of nature and spiritual aspects. So that segment really spoke to me, especially with how beautiful the animation is. It's just a story about creation, about ruin, and then beauty that comes from the ashes. It really is a touching moment, and one of my personal favorite moments in cinematic history. And there's so many other segments that work brilliantly with no dialogue and just creatively work fantastically well with classical pieces of music, with the occasional jazz in there. And they also bring back Mickey Mouse, and they bring in Donald Duck, and they themselves also bring some fun segments. So whichever version of Fantasia you prefer, you cannot deny that we need a third Fantasia installment to get those lost Fantasia shorts. Number 12, Schindler's List and Grave of the Fireflies. Oh boy, the tone has really changed, hasn't it? Yes, I have chosen not just any war films, but arguably some of the most depressing war films that have ever been made in history. One of them made by one of my personal favorite filmmakers, and the other made by one of the most beloved Japanese animators in history. May he also rest in the heavens. These films are not easy to get through, but the messages that they present are more powerful for it. So one film at a time, Schindler's List. This is a film depicting the Holocaust and how Schindler was brave enough to secretly work undercover to rescue as many Jews as he could during the darkest period in human history. And what really stands out in this film is not just the subject matter and the tone, but also the way it visually presents itself. There is color in the beginning when the Jews are lighting candles, but then it goes to monochromatic black and white, and the whole film, practically the whole film, is shown in black and white. Color indicates life and happiness, and monochrome clearly indicates this dark period that everybody went through. There was no color, no joy, no satisfaction on either side during this period of time. It was the darkest period in human history, and that is perfectly represented by the fact that practically the whole film is shot in black and white. But there are small glimpses of color, and to indicate small glimpses of hope, but they rarely appear. The girl in the red dress, the occasional candle lighting by the Jews, they rarely show up, but when they do, the film is all the more powerful for it. Whether it be hope that was taken away from us, or even just a small glimmer of hope that we can have during such dark periods of time. And then the ending. Man, the ending just left me speechless by the end. By the time the ending comes up, it's shown in color, and the real survivors of the Holocaust are placing flowers down as dedication to their savior. And then Liam Neeson, the actor who played Schindler, just looks down on his grave, and then it cuts to the credits. It just leaves you speechless. And that is a really powerful message in the film. And speaking of powerful films, Grave of the Fireflies. Oh, this is... Isao Takahata's masterpiece, that's what it is. And also, a film that made me cry like a baby. I am not afraid to admit that you cried like a baby when you saw this movie. It is just such a hard film to get through. And I'm surprised that they managed to make you cry even when they spoil the ending right there. Our two main characters die at the beginning of the film. I'm not giving away anything here. That's literally what happens at the start of the film. Yet despite that, the film still manages to make you sob like a baby somehow. I don't know how they do it. But a friend of mine recently told me that it was just due to build-up. And the fact that... And when I let that answer sink in, the whole thing started to make sense. It was the build-up towards the inevitability that eventually made us feel so much sympathy for these characters. And what makes this film really interesting is that you could have set this film in any kind of extreme period. It doesn't... This could have been in a tornado incident or a tsunami. You could have set this in a completely different scenario, yet it would still work the same. Although, actually, come to think of it, there are certain aspects of the film which makes it more powerful than the fact that it's a war film. Some people have interpreted this as an anti-war film, but it's not really anti-war, but it's not really pro-war either. This is more focused on a battle of pride with our main character. Basically, the story of Grave of the Fireflies is that these two children are struggling from the impact of the bombings they've had in their local town. And their mother has been severely injured. And they're having a hard time surviving, and the relatives of this young boy and his little sister are not really treating him very nicely, but you can hardly blame him, it's just during the wartime. But the boy gets fairly arrogant and says he can take care of himself and his little sister. So they head off to live out on their own, only to find that he's hardly good at it at all. And it's pretty intriguing because this is set in a period where, even to this day, the majority of young people are encouraged to fight harder, encouraging the arrogance. So it would make sense as to why this boy would do all these things. And you'd think he'd be a terrible person, but you gotta remember, he's just a little boy. He doesn't know any better, and that's what makes this so tragic. And even all the more tragic are the fact that it's based on a true story. So all in all, two incredible true stories represented brilliantly well by two master filmmakers. Number 11, Star Wars. Star Wars! Star Wars! Do I need to say any more? It's Star Wars! What can I say that hasn't already been said about the masterful original trilogy? Well, I guess I could talk about its impact, because this film has changed filmmaking as we know it. It had amazing special effects combining with... It had amazing puppetry and special effects. It got brilliant themes on faith and good versus evil, and such brilliantly memorable characters and quotable moments. It really is a classic, and it's a cultural phenomenon. I suppose I should take some time to talk about the sequel trilogy. As of recording this, the third one has yet to come out, but I really appreciate the sequel trilogy for taking a few more chances with what it's doing. And I know many people despise The Last Jedi, and I'm one of those people who actually likes The Last Jedi, because it's got a few interesting things to say about the characters and the character arcs. And it's also a visual spectacle, and it also feels really big. And the fact that there is a sequel trilogy just goes to show how big and how much of an impact Star Wars has been. And it just goes to show that Star Wars is going to touch every generation from now on. That's how big it is, and that's how much of a phenomenon it's become. And so of course it was bound to be part of my all-time favorite movie list. Number 10, Kubo and the Two Strings, my personal favorite stop-motion animated movie ever made. The visuals are gorgeous, and the story is equally gorgeous. It's a brilliantly adventurous, heart-wrenching and heart-warming fairy tale set in Japan, and it really is exciting. It really does immerse you in its story, especially when the main theme of the story is storytelling. There's so many endearing characters and really high-stakes emotional moments. Just about this boy who has really serious family issues, by the way. The stop-motion animation is really smooth, and I think the film is all the more better for being stop-motion animated, because there's certain scenes with origami models that come to life, so the representation of the joy that comes from origami is enhanced by the fact that it's stop-motion animated, and it makes it a bit more personal with the craft in even in subtle, nuanced ways. And there's also some themes of family and memories that are really, really brilliant. And even when I've seen it before, it's just such a spectacle to see, especially in terms of the emotions of the soul. It's just, oh, it's just so brilliant. Also, Matthew McConaughey is pretty funny as the beetle. Alright. Next up, The Red Turtle. This film is the very definition of simple yet effective. It is so basic with its concept, and yet everything that it does around it is so beautifully achieved. So the concept of the film is that it's a man who gets shipwrecked onto this remote island and he wants to get out. That's it. That's pretty much the basic plot going into this film. And I won't spoil anything else. This is a film that you just have to see for yourself, and there is no dialogue. The story is told entirely through the characters' expressions, feelings, what they're going through, and there's so many deeper themes, if you want to dig a bit deeper, regarding growing up, regarding acceptance, regarding emotional turmoil, regarding themes of home, spirituality, and family, and all sorts of wonderful things, all packed into one film. I'm just so amazed that something this simple can say so much. There's this one scene where a certain character is thinking about leaving, and without spoiling anything, the scene would probably require dialogue, some talking, and even the filmmakers admitted to that. But they just use expressions and certain visuals, and you understand it perfectly. It's so genius. I just love it. And I did get a bit teary-eyed at the end. It really is that beautifully done. Love it. Love European. Love it when Europe teams up with Studio Ghibli. Next up, Inside Out. It was very difficult picking my favorite Pixar movie. I could have picked any of them. I could have picked The Incredibles, I could have picked Toy Story, I could have picked Finding Nemo, we could have picked the other one made by the same director, Pete Docter. But I eventually went with Inside Out, just purely because of its creative ideas on mental health, which is a superbly relevant topic to talk about in today's society. And I'm so glad that it has a message that says that it's okay to be sad, or to be angry, or afraid, or disgusted. You can't be happy all the time, and you just have to deal with it. This film delves so much into some brilliant creative imagery regarding emotional maturity, as well as mental health. The film is centered around a 13-year-old girl named Riley, and she and her family have moved to San Francisco, and in this story, all of the emotions are personified. You have the cheerful joy, the pessimistic sadness, you have anger, you have fear, you have disgust, and they all take charge of what Riley should feel and how she should interact with certain things, and then it creates these memories. And there are so many really creative ideas. In fact, there were so many creative ideas that the filmmakers said that they couldn't fit all of their ideas into one film. So this is the one Pixar film where I actually want to see a sequel. As I'm recording this, they're making Toy Story 4, and I'm thinking, why? Why are you doing this? You better have a justified reason. Why not Inside Out 2? That has so much more justified reasons to make a sequel. You can expand on so many other topics. You can go through depression. You can go through what Riley's going through next. You could focus on another person. There's so many endless possibilities. And I love how this film delves into these issues in such a brilliant way that all ages can understand. I just adore it. And next up is The Prince of Egypt. This is by far, at least in my opinion, DreamWorks' best film. And that says a lot, seeing how it was only their second movie. But to this day, I am amazed at what it's been able to achieve, and yet no one really talks about it that often. Well, I am. I adore this film. I'm one of the film's biggest fans. I loved watching it when I was little, and as I got older watching it, it always felt new, and it got better and better as I watched it again and again. There are certain parts of this film that can appeal to all ages and can speak to all ages without talking down to anybody. And that's the thing I admire most about this film. Its ability to talk about so many big issues without talking down to any age group. And no matter how many times you watch it, it never gets old. I have no idea how they do this, but they do, and it's great. And it's mainly because of the creative liberties that they took with this adaptation of the Exodus saga from the Bible. And as a Christian myself, I'd say this is a brilliantly refreshing adaptation of retelling the Exodus saga. Even though it's not fully accurate, there are a few flaws here and there, I do respect what they were trying to go for, even if not all of it is perfect. But they got the majority of the important bits of Exodus down to a T. It is visually stunning. It perfectly combines traditional animation and digital animation. The digital animation doesn't distract, but rather enhances the 2D animation, making it so much more of a spectacle. And the songs are so memorable, and there's so many creative things that they do. There's such captivating performances, such high-stakes drama, and every time I watch it, I notice new little details and can take something new about it. My favorite scene in this movie is the burning bush scene where Moses encounters God in the form of a burning bush. The atmosphere they create in this scene is just so, for lack of a better word, heavenly. The music, the visuals, it's so pleasing. You feel like this is something out of this world. And the way they portray God, he's very caring, but he can also be very authoritative when he wants to be. And it sort of saddens me that DreamWorks doesn't really raise awareness of this film compared to their other franchises like Shrek or How to Train Your Dragon or Kung Fu Panda. Because this film was a major achievement, and in my opinion, it's their best movie because of how mature it is without pandering to anybody or... So yes, The Prince of Egypt is one of my all-time favorite movies. God bless this movie quite literally. Speaking of biblical films, my next all-time favorites on this bottom list are Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia. If I were to describe both of these films in one word, it would be big. These films have big stories, big characters, big scenarios, big landscapes, big music, big action, big themes, big fingers. Big pacing, big direction, big production, big amount of extras. Everything about these films are just big. They are so big, and unfortunately, due to the condition of Hollywood today, I don't think films like these are ever going to be made again. But that makes them stand out all the more as masterpieces and major achievements in filming history. And upon comparing the two, I like Ben-Hur for its story and how Ben is going through a rough journey through life, but eventually comes to a satisfying spiritual conclusion. And Lawrence of Arabia, I like more for its atmosphere. I just love these widescreen shots. I could just be immersed in this desert landscape all day. Not that I want to go to the desert, I'd be baked, but it just looks so amazing. The way that David Lean just makes everything feel big. And unlike other movies at its time, it never feels boring. It actually feels necessary to make it feel like you're going on such a long and dragging journey. And you're really appreciating the desert as much as Lawrence is, for that matter. So yes, two big movies that you should really check out. They are tremendous. Not to mention they have some amazing practical effects and an unbelievably large amount of extras. You look at some of these scenes, you think, whoa, they really got that amount of people to do that? Or, whoa, they really did that? Oh, they really did this? Whoa, that location is really that big? And you don't really see that in today's Hollywood because these directors really cared for their craft. And their craft has revolutionized filmmaking as we speak. So that's why I decided to put these two epic films on the list. I just love biblical epics.
Number 5, The Dark Knight. There are plenty of superhero movies to love, but The Dark Knight, to this day, remains the best of the best in my eyes. It took everything that was great about Batman Begins and raised the stakes even higher and made the message even more impactful. In fact, you don't even have to be a comic book nerd in order to enjoy this film. It treats itself more like a crime thriller than it does a stereotypical superhero movie. The film says so much about ethnic morality, choice, and anarchy all in one movie. As the film focuses on the power dynamic between three characters, Batman, Joker, and Harvey Dent, there are so many different essays you can find about all the different kinds of conflicts within this movie. And it's really fascinating that this film is so different yet so faithful to the source material. In fact, some of the themes can go so in depth that some people watching it for the first time might be slightly confused. If they just take the time to sink in the message about morality and choice and hope, then it will all make sense. All this combined with intense action, amazing special effects, and of course, Heath Ledger as the Joker. What many people describe as the perfect antagonist for this film. If you're a Batman fan, you owe it to yourself to watch this movie. Number 4, the Monty Python movies. Specifically, Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Life of Brian. If the Beatles were revolutionary for comedy, Monty Python was revolutionary for comedy. Always surreal, always silly, always fun, perfect for all ages. All of their sketches are memorable, and they are the kings of comedy to this day, and the pinnacle of their achievements are these two films. What makes these two comedy films so much fun is that they never take themselves seriously. Upon comparing the two, I think Monty Python and the Holy Grail has the more memorable skits, whereas Life of Brian has a more memorable and, quite frankly, better ending. I know the ending of Monty Python and the Holy Grail was purposely anticlimactic for a joke, but Life of Brian has a much more cheery and satisfying ending with a song which is, quite frankly, the national anthem for Monty Python. Always look on the bright side of life, and that's what they did. They gave people smiles. Now, I'm well aware that Life of Brian has received many... Now, especially as a Christian myself, I am well aware that this film, Life of Brian, is quite controversial in the public eye. But honestly, I don't see it as that offensive. Because they're not making fun of Jesus, they fully respect him in the good light. They're poking fun of everything surrounding Jesus at the time. The followers, the Romans, the time period, the conditions of what it was like to live back then, as well as some misunderstandings, classic farce humor, slapstick, surreal humor. So this is still hilarious in my eyes. Not much else to say other than the fact that I think these are the best comedy films ever made. Now, if you excuse me, I've got to find some coconuts. Number 3, Amelie and Forrest Gump. Both these films are very similar in the fact that they both focus on such a delightfully positive role model. The titular characters of these films go out of their way to help people that they care for and help their local community despite their weaknesses. And that is such an inspiring message to give to people, especially to someone like me who has autism. Amelie can be described as the best French film ever made, as it focuses on, well, Amelie. She is a highly imaginative girl who's seen her fair share of tragedy and fantasy, and now works as a waitress in the Montmartre bar, which I've actually been to! And over a series of events, she finds out that her goal in life is to help others. This film is the very definition of delightful. There are so many quirky ways that this film tells its story. Like Amelie and the narrator discussing details about certain characters that really don't affect the story, but they just add to certain characters' personalities. And sometimes the film will enter the perspective of Amelie's imagination. There's one scene when she's under pressure, but then she goes, whew, and then she literally just becomes a puddle. And sometimes her imagination gets way too carried away, like one part when the narration is describing what would happen if her crush went away to a certain country. Okay, I won't say. But also, this film takes advantage of the fact that it's a visual medium, and it shows such brilliant imagery, like revealing certain keys in her pockets, the lighting getting brighter whenever a character feels certain bits of enlightenment, and the colour tone is so unique. If I were to describe the colour tone, it's like going on a picnic in Paris during the spring or summertime. Oh, I love that film. And as for Forrest Gump, it's equally inspirational. It's the story of a man who isn't very smart, but his heart is enormous. It's the story of a man who isn't very smart, but his heart is larger than life, and his disadvantages don't stop him from being an inspirational friend. He goes through many events of American history, and even encounters a few celebrities, but it doesn't really matter too much to him, because what matters to him in the end is caring about his family and friends. And the film is cleverly and poignantly told in a non-linear fashion, as Forrest Gump is waiting at a bus stop. Not to mention, it's very quotable.
Run, Forrest, run away!
My mama always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Hayao Miyazaki is my all-time favourite film director. All of his films have enlightened so many people of all ages with his universal themes and amazing artistry. Well, he has an entire studio to help him, but he's the one who comes up with the stories. He is an inspirational role model who has proved that animation can be for everyone and can discuss so many themes. And for me, the pinnacle of his achievements are Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke. These epic masterpieces discuss so many themes in such an imaginative way. And once you've seen these films, you can definitely see their impact on the media in general after these films came out. These films blew away my expectations. I didn't expect the messages of Princess Mononoke to be as thought-provoking as they were. I didn't expect Spirited Away to be as unique as it was. Both these films introduce simple goals for the main characters, and they really immerse you into these worlds. And they have so many things happen to get in the way of their simple goals. But one film at a time. Princess Mononoke. I've seen many films like Ferngully, Pocahontas, and Avatar, where it's obvious that the settlers are the evil ones trying to take advantage of the materials of the environment, whilst the natives are in the right. And to an extent, this film displays the same message. Except here, the environmental message is a bit more subtle and nuanced, because the natives can be quite brutal in this film. And whilst the settlers are doing terrible things to the environment, they're doing it for justified reasons. In any other film, the settlers, who are Lady Eboshi and her iron workers, could have easily have been the villains. Yet they make it clear that there are no stereotypical villains here. Just people and creatures trying to live and make use of their land. Lady Eboshi is cold and terrible towards the side of nature, and yet she's seen as a savior by all the other humans, as she's not just bringing in unemployed people, but also some prostitutes and some brothels and even lepers. She gives outsiders a home, and that gives her all the justification to do all these terrible things. And this environmental message is even more nuanced by the fact that, if you think about it, it focuses less on the environmental message itself and more as a message on pacifism. Our main character, Ashitaka, is cursed by a demon early on in the film, and he's been sent to this battle between nature and industrialism, as he tries to end the battle and just get everyone to get along whilst trying to remain as impartial as possible. Because if he gives in to fear and hatred, the demon will get through his whole arm and consume his whole body. And because of this, there's also this major criticism on hate and the impact that it can have unless people change their ways and find a way to get along with each other. He understands the beauty and necessities of nature. He understands the struggles of people, and this film has just got a brilliant message. And as for Spirited Away, this has got to be the most imaginative film I've ever seen. In spite of having a major influence by Alice in Wonderland, everything you see in this film is all from Miyazaki's imagination. And there's so many themes of growing up, greed, and identity, and many other subtle themes if you look into the subtext. This film doesn't hold back on the weirdness. In fact, the majority of the film feels quite uncomfortable. And it's mainly due to the situation that Chihiro is in. She's moved away from home, and just when they think they've arrived, they ended up in a mysterious place. Her parents started eating this food that turned them into pigs. And now she has to learn to grow up and rescue them. And take a job in a bathhouse. But at the same time, it's still whimsical, it's still fascinating. And it engages you because you want to see Chihiro escape. But in spite of all the chaos, there's still beautiful moments that just let you breathe and let you sink in the atmosphere. And everyone's favourite scene in the film, including mine, is the train scene. It's a moment when Chihiro has escaped from most of the worst of the chaos. And just has time to breathe. And combined with the music, it's a very reflective moment. And it perfectly encapsulates the feeling of riding a train. This is the type of film that I take great pleasure in introducing my friends to, just to see their reactions to all the weirdness and all the genius writing and clever themes that have gone into this. And it was these two films that got me introduced to Studio Ghibli, and my gosh, what an introduction. And before I mention my number one favourite movies of all time, I'd like to give some honourable mentions. Blues Brothers, a hilarious comedy with brilliantly catchy music. The Simpsons movie. I love The Simpsons. This movie was great. A majority of the other Disney movies. A majority of the other Pixar movies. A majority of the other Studio Ghibli movies. A majority of the other DreamWorks movies. The cartoon children movies. Les Miserables. Not perfect, but still a great homage to music phenomenon. Jurassic Park. Really intense scenes, amazing special effects, and of course Steven Spielberg. Amazing Grace, an inspiringly amazing and true story on William Wilberforce and the abolitionists, and how they used human face to get rid of slavery. The Shack. I've heard that not many people are very fond of this movie, but it made me cry like a baby, so I'm giving it a thumbs up. Citizen Kane.
Yes, I was extremely ironic that the greatest film of all time isn't actually on my favorite film of all time list.
But I really do admire its stunning cinematography and plot twist, and it's the perfect example of a character study. Harry Potter, a good versus evil story that I grew up watching in my childhood. Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's amazing that this such a widespread blockbuster movie franchise can be so consistent and so amazing. Loving Vincent, kind of similar to Citizen Kane, except you get the added benefit of being visually gorgeous with every frame being literally a Van Gogh painting. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, a hilarious comedy that you really need to check out. Some Like It Hot, a classic comedy that you need to check out. Road to El Dorado, Tony Miguel Vegas film. The Iron Giant classic Brad Bird film. Winnie the Pooh. Tigger! Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva, an actual good video game adaptation. The Lego Batman movie, hysterical. Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams and a convincing message. Cocoon, an interesting sci-fi film about mortality. Darkest Hour, Barry Oldman's greatest performance. Seven Samurai, a classic film made by Akira Kurosawa. Around the World in 8 Days, it's a fun film. Deadpool, hilarious. Logan, a brilliant finale to our favorite superhero character. A Tangled Panic, manic, and I love it. Up at Treasure Island, love it. It's a Wonderful Life, great Christmas movie. Arthur Christmas, also great Christmas movie. And the favorite, I love its bizarre tone and uncomfortable message. I just love watching films, okay? And without further ado, my number one favorite movies of all time are the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I love the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Me and my family adore his work. I love Middle Earth to the point where I've named my channel after one of the races in Middle Earth. The lower forms of angelic beings here to save the world. This is an amazingly faithful adaptation of the books. Even with a few small changes, they've made these changes for the fact that it's a film adaptation, and at the time, people said that it was impossible to make a live-action adaptation of Lord of the Rings, and Peter Jackson and his huge crew of New Zealand proved everybody wrong. They took advantage of the fact that it was a visual medium. In fact, some of the scenes are arguably better paced and more visually appealing, if not tells a great story from the visuals alone. They took fantasy passionately serious for this film trilogy. And for me, this film trilogy has every single thing that I love about movies stuffed into one epic trilogy, especially if you want the extended editions. If you're a Tolkien fan, you owe it to yourself to watch the extended editions. Trust me, the extra hours are worth it. The casting is perfect, the pacing is perfect, the visual cinematography is outstanding, the special effects are amazing to this day. The music is brilliantly composed with the gorgeous musical soundtrack. The action is intense, it's quotable. But whether in book or film form, there is one thing that I love about this series that makes this the pinnacle of media's achievement in my eyes. And that is world building. Every single time I read the books or watch the films, I'm immediately hooked, and I feel like I'm a part of this world. Every single aspect of the series was thoroughly thought out, especially its world. History, cultures, races, Christian symbolism, geography, lore, everything was well thought out to make this feel like a real place that you can live and breathe in. And it's ultimately why I love watching movies, to get sucked into their worlds. The Lord of the Rings trilogy has successfully done just that. Everything in this film trilogy is done to a T, and you need to watch them in order. You can't have one without the other. And whatever flaws this film trilogy does have are just mere nitpicks. I know people like to complain about the ending of Return of the King, but I think it was a necessity after so much chaos. Not to mention ending of all the character arcs, and especially in seeing our main characters achieve their real goals. About being spiritually satisfied. And there's many themes and substances that go into this, and me and my dad and my sister would happily do a marathon of all the films, all over again. It never gets old.